Put your hands together and welcome to the stage, Jenny Magic.
Thanks. Hello! I'm so happy to be here. Oh, you guys, y'all are an amazing crowd. I'm so excited. I hope I can keep the energy up that has already been brought this morning. Woo! I want to start off by saying that George Lucas always envisioned Indiana Jones as a hero in over his head. By definition, this character was overwhelmed. He always managed to figure it out, but overwhelm is built into his DNA. Whether he was running from darts flying at all angles, fighting the next giant guy with a machete coming at his head, he was always willing to jump in and keep trying. This man was running from boulders at every opportunity. It seems like there wasn't a challenge he couldn't handle. And he did that by bringing two distinct traits that all of us need to bring into our work. He brought courage to leap when he had no guarantee he was going to make it to the other side, courage to keep trying when it looked like the odds were completely stacked against him, curiosity to never let go of the thing he was looking for. He was in it to win it, and this man would risk everything to keep going. Unfortunately, we do not all have his bravado, and our courage flags and our curiosity wanes when things get a little overwhelming. And unfortunately, we find ourselves falling into what I like to refer to as the pitfalls of uncertainty. The first pitfall of uncertainty is avoidance. This is the ostrich, which, little known fact, I didn't realize this, but ostriches don't actually stick their head in the sand when they're scared, but they do fall over and try to blend in with the surroundings, so the metaphor holds. But avoidance and ostriching in the pitfalls of uncertainty is when we just would rather not look at what is coming down the path. We would like to avoid the darts by just laying on the floor and hoping they go over our heads. In the workplace, this looks an awful lot like wait and see, hold the line. We'll revisit that next quarter, right? This is one of the most common ways that we avoid the pitfalls of uncertainty. The second one is what psychologists like to call anxious fixing. This is when we're willing to do anything, any action, just to make ourselves feel better. This is hitting that panic button over and over and over again, hoping that one of these times something different is going to come out the other side. And it's no wonder that everybody is feeling this level of overwhelm. In 2022, the average employee experienced 10 planned enterprise changes, up from just 2 in 2016, a 5-fold increase in 5 years. There are many darts and arrows coming at all of us as we try to navigate the crazy world of everything around us. Unfortunately, everybody can only handle so much as individuals and as teams. And when a team has reached its limit of change, we call that change saturation, when the number of organizational changes exceeds the capacity of the individuals to effectively adopt and implement those changes. When we are in over our head and nothing else can sink in, the sponge is full, we are saturated, we are done. Sadly, something like 73% of employees report that their organizations are near, at, or beyond the saturation point. This stat has remained relatively consistent over the last few years. Teams are feeling like there is so much they could do that they don't have a very clear idea of what they should do. And it's no surprise that in that same period of time, willingness to get on board with whatever new idea the leaders have has collapsed. Willingness to support organizational change has collapsed from 74% in 2016 to just 43% when this data was last taken in 2022. This is an insane shift in the way our teams are coming to innovation, change, experimentation. Tim just talked about the value of being open to experimenting. Unfortunately, we have teams that are not super excited about whatever it is we're going to bring back from this conference and all of this learning. So today we're going to talk about ways that you can get them more excited and build teams that are ready to learn. I like to say you can buy compliance, but you can't buy willingness. We know that we can incentivize behavior, we can threaten behavior, we can put it in the job description, but when we really want to, that above and beyond, what Gartner calls discretionary effort, we have to get that from our teams willingly. And that's one of the things a lot of the leaders I work with are telling me is that they've lost the want to. Their organizations will do what they have to, but they've lost the want to. So we know that teams are tired, they're overwhelmed, they're change fatigued, they're exhausted, and yet there's still a ton to do. So when the boulder's bearing down on you and change fatigue is everywhere, and you can't put your head in the sand, and you're not allowed to just hit the panic button. What do you do when you don't know what to do? The answer is become a learning organization. This is a common concept. MBAs learn about it. It's 90s era management thinking, but it is something that needs to be unearthed and revisited and brought forward in this time of crazy change that every organization is dealing with. And becoming a culture of learning is a really simple process. You've seen these kinds of charts before, right? We have to have a system to detect what needs to be different. We need to learn what we can about the situation. We need to experiment, as Tim talked about. What could we try differently? And obviously, that's going to be a cycle. Experiment and learn, experiment and learn, experiment and learn. And once we've gotten to an experiment that's functional and proves to be better than what we were doing before, we need to make sure we're implementing that across teams with everybody getting bought in and excited. Unfortunately, every single step in the learning journey has an off-ramp. So in the detect phase, when you've come up with something that could be better, there's a couple of things. That panic button is right there waiting for you to just do anything, whether or not it makes any sense or has any context. We also tend to defend the way we've done things, not want to admit that there's a problem or blame or think about ways that we can not actually look the problem in the face, which would give us that capability of not actually doing anything about it, right? But if we're willing and we move to the next phase and we decide we're going to learn something about the scenario and do better next time, we can hopefully move to experimentation, but unfortunately, we often learn the wrong lessons. We fail to apply what we've learned, or we repeat mistakes. There are ways that we can't even hear what our donors are saying when we go and try to gather that information. So the learning gets lost and never makes it into a quality experiment phase. As we try to move through the experiment phase of the process, we can overcomplicate our findings. We can get stuck in process or standard operating procedures or new ways of working or team dynamics about how we're going to do something and just kind of get stuck without it ever going anywhere. And eventually end up, some teams hoard knowledge where we have one group that's excited for how much better their stars look with their results. And so they don't end up sharing those learnings, or those learnings aren't well received across the organization. And then finally, once we've successfully implemented and things are better and that original problem is off our plates, we can kind of avoid detecting the next one. We can stick our head in the sand and ostrich again and forget our opportunities to continue on this learning cycle. Now, there are 3 core components of a learning organization, and all 3 are equally important. We're going to focus more on one today. But the first one is a supportive learning environment. An environment that has a culture of learning baked in, leadership, top-down, time for the tactics from the bottom up. The whole culture allows for building block number 2, those concrete learning processes, documented ways that we detect, learn, experiment, and implement every single time we find an opportunity. And building block 3 is leadership that reinforces that learning. This is, again, making sure that there is a culture of interaction that allows these learnings to happen. Now, I should probably pause and tell you why I'm up here on stage sharing these stories. I've spent almost 20 years working with marketing teams, either leading teams or as a consultant, helping them think of new ways to energize their audiences. I really spent my career in personas and journey mapping and helping organizations think through what they're trying to take their customers and clients through. About 5 years ago, I realized that something dramatic had happened within the organizations that I served. Their teams were suddenly unable to take the ideas and strategies that they had paid for and put them into practice. They were getting stuck between learning and implementation. There was a spin cycle happening there. You could check back in a year after delivering a strategy that they were really excited about on delivery, and they'd say, yeah, we loved it, everything was great about it, it's not you, it's not the strategy, but we didn't have what we needed to get it done. So we're gonna circle back, revisit that, keep working on that same strategy. And it became clear to me that this wasn't a single team's problem and this wasn't a single organization's culture issue. This was something that was happening kind of across the board. And if you'll notice, those stats I gave you about change and organizational change, lots of things kind of coincided with the last 4 or 5 years. So I went down this rabbit hole, and I ended up with this article that I highly recommend from the New York Times, What Google Learned from Its Quest to Build the Perfect Team. And it taught me a lot about the modern era of team dynamics, but it also sent me on a wild goose chase around psychological safety, which is a term that was coined in the 90s by Dr. Amy Edmondson from Harvard. Research, very academic, her paper is kind of dense to get through, and it kind of had a little moment in the management consulting space in the 90s and then kind of fizzled out. Psychological safety is something we're going to talk about in depth here in a minute, but this idea is a way that teams work together that in her research was the #1 criteria for successful teams who achieve their organizational goals and were happy doing it. Fast forward to 2012, independently, that research had kind of fallen off the plate. Google decided that they were going to spend multiple years with their 170-something teams researching 250 different variables to try to figure out what makes a perfect team. They looked at introvert, extrovert. They looked at educational background. They looked at cultural background. They looked at whether or not people shared hobbies and lifestyle and culture outside of the workplace. They looked at whether people ate together in the Google dining hall. They looked at all of these variables. And if you go to Google's rework page where they talk about their behind-the-scenes research, the #1 item that they came up with out of Project Aristotle, which was the code name for this project, was psychological safety. So this caused a resurgence in this topic and really brought it to the forefront of the conversation around team dynamics and what makes a great team. And psychological safety is really just that quality of a team that says, I am allowed to bring my ideas, to provide feedback, to take risks, and do all of that without fear of punishment. That's the whole idea. A lot of people liken it to trust, but trust is really between two individuals. So it's really easy to say, I like Jill and I like Mike, but when me, Mike, and Jill get in a room, that's a different dynamic. That dynamic is psychological safety. So the first domain of psychological safety that I want to talk about is open conversation. In open conversation, team members feel comfortable expressing their concerns or reservations. They learn from one another, and they hear things in the spirit that it was intended, right? So this is assume good intent. This is about being able to really push back on ideas that don't have a lot of legs, or push back on the loudest voice in the room, push back on different spots in the org chart, really comfortable providing feedback, even if that feedback isn't positive, right? Even if they're terrified, even if they're not particularly excited about where you want to go. This one's pretty obvious, and you know when you have it and you know when you don't, but it's one of the metrics that's easier to define. The second domain of psychological safety is inclusivity. This is where the team actively works to ensure that all perspectives are represented. Many modes are offered for quiet or less comfortable team members to share their perspectives. It's really important in that open conversation to make sure the most gregarious, extroverted, loudest voice in the room isn't the only voice in the room. And so organizations that are great at psychological safety have multiple ways for organization team members to bring their ideas forward or to provide feedback. I know some organizations that have sort of like a thumbs up, thumbs down in meetings. I was actually at a conference where the organizer said, if the speaker starts selling from the stage, I want you to tap your feet really lightly and give like audible feedback to the speaker that that's not what you wanted to hear. I have organizations that have index cards where you get a certain number at the beginning of the week, and they're sort of like tiebreakers. They can like farkle for their decision when they're having these discussions to allow everybody to have a way that feels comfortable for their voice. A lot of times this includes not just making meetings the only place that we provide feedback and input, but being thoughtful about providing written opportunities, providing lots of formats and modalities for people that may or may not feel comfortable in the traditional way of providing feedback. I mean, Indy always lets his team know where they're going, even if he really doesn't always let them in on the plan. He's not the perfect psychological safety team leader, I have to say that. The third domain of psychological safety is willingness to help. This gets back to that discretionary effort I talked about earlier. This is when we have discretionary effort and we're putting it towards the team. We've got the want to. So this is when the team really feels like they're all in this together and that wins will be shared. This is when team members pick up the slack for each other for the benefit of the whole and don't take advantage of others. So this is when we feel like we're all rowing in the same direction for the same purpose. And so when one team member gets tired, we're happy to pick up the slack and row for them because we believe that the boat is headed in a good direction. We're all going at the same pace, and we're all working as hard as we possibly can. So that willingness really comes in as a support and as a way to move forward together. Like in this scene, when she asked for his hat because she's about to be sick at the grossness of the dinner. So he's happy to provide it to prevent a mess. I love this quote from Dr. Linda Hill in her book, The Art and Practice of Leading Innovation. She says, people are willing to innovate, they're willing to take risks, to jump on board with you when they're part of a collaborative community bound by a compelling purpose. Now, I know almost all of you have a mission or purpose-driven organization, so that is front and center for the work that you do. What we're talking about here today is that collaborative community. Are we building an organization where people truly feel connected and safe and ready to bring their whole selves and all of their ideas to the table as we move through experimentation and learning? And the fourth domain of psychological safety is the attitude towards risk and failure. This is where the team sees failure as a necessary byproduct of growth and innovation instead of something that should be punished or avoided at all costs. Now, a lot of organizations will tell you that they're a learning organization, they value experiments, and they're absolutely on board with trying until they get it right. Unfortunately, when many of those experiments fail, the response that's most often at the surface is, oh, we shouldn't have done that. It didn't work. And the thing is, most of your experiments are not going to work. That's the definition of an experiment. We're testing a hypothesis. And so the language that our leadership brings to experimentation, the language that we bring to our experiments, needs to be about that learning experimentation cycle and less about success and failure, right? Everything that happens is an opportunity to learn something about our donors, to learn something about our process, to learn something about our own way of thinking and the blind spots we're bringing. So thinking about risk and failure as an exciting opportunity rather than something to be avoided at all costs. I mean, hold on, here we go. We're going to try something, right? The thing is, people often, from the outside looking in, and leaders who are a little bit disconnected from the day in and day out of the work, often really want the short and easy answer. They hope that one, tweak to that email is going to be the magic door that opens forever and ever and does everything we need to get our audience excited. And unfortunately, there is a messy middle that cannot be avoided, that is deeply ingrained in this experimentation culture, and it has to be something that we embrace and are excited about rather than something that we're avoiding at all costs. This is what the process looks like, especially now. I love these stickers from Psychological Safety Organization. Everything is an experiment. Put this everywhere. Everything we do, every interaction, every email is a test. It's an opportunity to learn. Dr. Edmondson's most recent book is called The Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well. And I recommend it for anybody that's on the fence about this idea of embracing and getting excited about failure. And she talks about intelligent failure. And she says a failure is intelligent when it's the result of a thoughtful experiment, not a haphazard or sloppy one, right? We can do this. We can think through ways to try new things that aren't scary, that have boundaries, that have safeguards and safety rails, that still teach us something about what we're trying to do. When we build psychologically safe spaces, our team feels like true team members, not subordinates. They know how their work contributes to the strategy. The rigid silos and hierarchy within organizations and information sharing and all of the things that need to happen for great work start to soften, and teams feel safe to experiment, test, and innovate. If you're not sure where your team stands, I highly recommend you go to Dr. Edmondson's website, thefearlessorganizationsscan.com, because you can take the free 3-minute question test and kind of figure out how you're feeling about your team. Interestingly enough, 75% of organizational leaders overestimate how their team would score on this, right? There's also ways where you can take it as a team and have an anonymous team score to kind of understand, generally speaking, what's the spread on any given one of these domains. What is it that we feel? What do I feel? And what does the team feel for discussion? All right, so hopefully I've convinced you that investing in experimentation is valuable and investing in your team's psychological safety is the only way to get there. So I want to talk a little bit about some actionable strategies once you've decided on something that you're planning to do, right? So this is the change journey from my book last year, Change Fatigue, Flip Teams from Burnout to Buy-in. And we talk a lot about the 6 steps of a change so that internally we can navigate those with our team and have open conversation at each level. So first we have to identify the catalyst. What was broken? What did we detect in our learning journey that we think we might want to fix? And then we need to assess readiness and capacity. Are we able to do anything about this right now? This is a place where a lot of teams get stuck. They have a million great ideas and they have to rank and sort them. And unfortunately, some of them just aren't on the table right now. This is that overwhelming change our organizations are facing from the beginning of the deck. Thinking about, do we have the time, space, and energy to do this right now? The third is commitment. Are we willing to learn whatever this experiment teaches us? This is also commitment from a leadership perspective. Too many organizations keep moving the goalposts on their teams. So we'll try something, we'll commit, we'll kind of get halfway through an experiment and then decide that the results of that experiment aren't useful and pivot and relocate our energy elsewhere. Unfortunately, that leaves us with a bunch of half-baked experiments and not a lot of learnings. As we move through the change journey, we'll collaborate to plan that experiment, we'll calibrate as we learn and implement from that, and we'll calculate our progress as we move towards our goals. The first and most essential and most avoided and most skipped part of this whole process is writing down what we're trying to do. Too many times I see organizations sit around a conference table and discuss something they've detected and a learning they'd like to take and experiment, and they do not write it down. And the reason this is so essential and so simple is that we hear, when we're speaking and talking to each other, we hear what we want to hear. We interpret through the lens and filter of our own brains, of our own attention span, of the moment that we're in, of who the speaker is, et cetera, et cetera. When we take the time to write down what are our pain points, who's impacted on our team that has to do something about this, what's our desired future state, what is the problem statement that we're going to take into our experiment phase, right? Writing it down is for real the first step. And too many organizations can't point to a problem statement. They just got a lot of initiatives kind of half-baked running around in circles, which means people typically aren't aligned on what we're doing or how essential it is. The next step is to do that capacity planning I was talking about. Assess your team's change readiness. There's lots of metrics you can use to think about. I like a sparter chart because you can actually like maybe use a different color for each team or each area that you have to work on and think about, you know, are we ready? Do we have capacity? Is there resistance? Do we have budget challenges? What would keep us from moving forward with this particular idea or change that we've got on the horizon? I urge you to think about who you've got leading, organizing, and thinking about your experiments, especially as it relates to the org chart. Too many teams are beholden to where someone sits on the org chart or what they think their talents are, what they think their power is in the organization. And unfortunately, the people who bring an experimentation mindset are not always sitting at the top of the decision-making tree. So getting really clever and creative about bringing in different voices, again, that open conversation from the psychological safety domains, bringing in different voices and figuring out who is comfortable in risky situations, who is comfortable experimenting and leading change. Are there places where you can carve your more risk-averse folks out of the process early so that things can actually move forward? This is a little bit of an exercise in creative team building, but it's often really important for things to move past the messy middle stage and into something that people, larger risk-focused folks in the organization can get behind as things move. So once we've got the right people on the bus, I urge you to let them fly. This is a murmuration of starlings. I love that phrase. And something interesting that scientists have learned about the way that these birds fly is that there's not a leader bird. Each bird is learning from the person next to them. Each bird, the person next to them, the bird next to them, they're following the behaviors and patterns. And so what you end up with is this gorgeous learning body of birds that are doing beautiful patterns, but not because somebody predicted a pattern in advance and is leading clearly and thoughtfully in that straight line to success, but they're adapting to the environment, to the whims of the bird next to them, and they're sort of following a pattern and rules. A learning organization creates processes, culture, and structure so that every bird understands that we have open conversation that includes everyone, and we're willing to support, and we're going to try new things, and we're going to experiment. Every bird knows that in their DNA, and as we move through different challenges and opportunities, we let them fly. I love this quote from the founder of Visa: "With clear purpose and principles, you can let go of command and control." And I think with all the change and innovation and opportunity staring at us, leaders have to sit back and think about what are some ways that I can let these experiments go forward in a safe way where we can experiment within boundaries, but also that give my team the flexibility to try new things without this top-down structure of command and control. So we want to share visibly. The most important function as you leave here and start to think about all the fantastic ideas you're going to bring forward is how can we go back and start that open conversation. So this is where organizations that succeed at this invite radical visibility into how decisions are made. Maybe not at the very tippy top, but at least about how experiments are approved or not, how we're making decisions about budgetary stuff, et cetera, et cetera. We want to be transparent about what we know and what we don't. Experiments are always going to have an element of the unknown. We're going to be figuring something out. And I think too often in the past, traditional leadership has been hesitant to let the team see behind the curtain or let the sausage see the sausage being made, right? Because the messy middle would indicate to employees that we didn't know what we were doing or make teams feel uncertain. Unfortunately, that uncertainty has already permeated everything. So that uncertainty is there. Let's be honest about what it is and what it isn't. And then we want to openly reward folks who are asking questions and knowledge sharing across silos, right? We need to think about creative and innovative ways to connect across our teams so that every bit of learning and knowledge comes forward, even if it's from unexpected spots. We want to make sure we're incentivizing the right behaviors. So we need to root out any behavior that undermines psychological safety and learning behavior. This can be particularly tricky when these are habits ingrained at the top of the org chart, right? So this is something that can happen in a small team executing really well. It can be something that happens from the top. It can meet in the middle. But we want to think about ways that we are flagging and pointing out opportunities for improving our psychological safety. We also need to learn what truly motivates our team and rethink our reward structure. For some people, leading the meeting is such a high, and that visibility is a really great reward. For other people, it's absolutely terrifying. So understanding the intrinsic nature of what motivates our individual employees and where they sit in the organization and giving them the flexibility and autonomy to live that purpose within the team is a powerful motivation to win back their want to. Again, stop assigning work based solely on the org chart. We need to be open to task trading and skill sharing and being flexible across the way that we work. And we want to listen to understand. We need to hear their concerns, even if they slow down our strategy. We need to hear feedback, even if it takes things in a different direction. And if you're not the right person in your organization to listen, deputize others to be those ears. I've had organizations where there is a captain of feedback and everybody goes to that safe person that they know and trust, and that person gathers feedback and rolls it up anonymously so that the leaders can hear things without the individual speaker being part of the conversation, right? We know that silencing doesn't eliminate concerns. It just sends them underground where we can't do anything about it. So I want you to think about what you're going to do, taking action in your organization. You've got the notes section there on your little learning sheet. I want you to think about what you're going to do as you move through your organization, take all these fantastic ideas back, try to motivate people to get into an experiment mindset. We know that change can be an organizational advantage. You can use this to think differently about the way that you operate. So I want you all to go build learning organizations. Thank you.